Chapter 2.
Chapter 2.
The New Kid.
The New Kid.
Andy managed to avoid Gary and his bully friends for the rest of the day. He made sure to get a seat in the back row of all his classes. He ate alone in the cafeteria at a small table hidden behind a brick column where no one could see him. When last hour ended, Andy took his time packing up his stuff. He wanted the halls to be empty of everyone, especially Gary Burke and his buddies. By the time he got to the front doors of the school, he thought he was safe. The halls were empty all right, but out front, trouble was waiting. "There he is," Gary said as Andy walked down the front steps. "We've been waiting for you." Andy stopped walking. There was no escape. When this happened last year, Scott would go one way and Andy would go the other. If they ran as fast as they could, one of them would always get away. Sometimes both would escape without getting lost in the mud or dropped head first into a trash can. But now Andy was alone. If he ran, all three bullies would chase him. They'd catch him eventually. He decided not to bother. "Well, here I am," Andy said. He held out his book bag. "Take my bag, toss it in the mud, whatever. Just get it over with." Gary walked slowly toward him. "Now that's no fun, Andy," Gary said. His two friends fell in line behind Gary. The three bullies stood at the bottom of the steps and smirked up at Andy. Andy swallowed hard. He took a deep breath. Then he walked down the steps right at Gary. The henchmen each took one of Andy's arms and held him. Gary smiled at Andy. "Time to take your punishment, Andy," Gary said. "Punishment for what?" Andy asked. Gary shrugged. "I don't know," he said. He thought for a second and smirked, then said, "For being so short." Then he pulled back his fist and punched Andy right in the gut. Andy fell to his knees. The henchmen laughed. They let go of his arms, and Andy fell forward into the mud at the bottom of the steps. He could tell that his glasses were getting bent even more. "Now, where have I seen this before?" Gary asked, pretending to be confused. His friends laughed. "Hand me his bag," Gary said. Then he suddenly screamed. "Hey, get off!" Andy rolled onto his side and looked up. The afternoon sun was bright, and Andy had to squint to see. Gary Burke was a foot off the ground, his arms and legs waving wildly and helplessly. "Let go of me!" he shouted. His henchmen just watched, mouths wide open. Then Gary fell in a heap right into the mud next to Andy. Standing there with his back to the sun was a boy Andy had never seen before. He was taller than Gary, broader than Gary, and apparently stronger than Gary. With the sun behind the tall stranger, it was too hard for Andy to see his face. The stranger leaned down and put out his hand. Andy grabbed it and stood up. The henchmen exchanged a look and then ran off. Gary slowly got to his feet. "Wait for me!" he called after his friends. Then he jogged after them, shooting nervous looks back at Andy and the strange kid. Andy watched the three bullies run off. Then he turned to the stranger. "Who are you?" Andy asked. "I'm Emmett," the stranger said. I'm new here.
I'm new here.
Chapter 3.